Broadcasting from the Allen B. Levan NSU Broward Center of Innovation at Nova Southeastern University. Welcome to Sunshine Startups Live, featuring rockstar entrepreneurs, bright ideas, and experts on the startup ecosystem. And now your hosts of Sunshine Startups Live, Jim Ryan and John Wensveen.
Hi, and welcome to another great episode of Sunshine Startups Live. I'm your host, entrepreneur, investor, and startup enthusiast, Jim Ryan. Another great episode on deck for you today. And of course, I'm joined by my friend and colleague, John Wensveen. John, great to be with you.
Great to be with you, my friend. John Wensveen, Chief Innovation Officer at NSU Florida and Executive Director of the Levan Center of Innovation, also known as the world's first theme park for entrepreneurs. And can I just put a little plug? We're celebrating our second year anniversary of operations this month.
Number 2, and our second season.
2 and 2.
Of Sunshine Startups Live. We joked that the networks renewed our contract, and it's terribly exciting.
Still looking for sponsorships. That's the ask. Right. We've never actually made an ask of anybody to help sponsor this, you know.
I know, and we need to do better at that, don't we?
A couple of guys in the basement just having fun, right?
Like Wayne's World, right?
Yeah, it's Wayne's World.
Well, this is going to be a great episode, and remember to like and subscribe, share the podcast if you like the content. We talk about entrepreneurship, those that foster the ecosystem, successful business executives. Really excited. Got some things in common with our guest today. A business corporate executive previously, entrepreneur now. Keith Costello, President and CEO of the Locality Bank based in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And Keith, thanks so much for taking the time out to be with us today.
Hey, I appreciate the invitation, and I'm just waiting for you guys to ask me for a sponsorship now.
That's recorded.
Well, as a true banker, we know he brought his checkbook with him, so this is a great person to ask.
Checks, cash deposits.
Exactly. So Keith, and again, thanks for carving out the time. And you've got an incredible career, several decades in banking, and we're going to talk about your background, banking, finance, maybe the market, certainly weave in entrepreneurship and ask you about your experiences thus far. Talk to us about, and our audience, about your background, though, those decades long, briefly, about some of the experiences you've had as an executive in the banking industry. So kind of wind the clock back a little bit for us and share your bio.
Sure. So I ended up really going to college through the Army ROTC program. Ended up at the University of Tampa, studied business, but then I had to go in the military for 5 years to pay back that scholarship that I got. But grew up in upstate New York, but ended up at University of Tampa for school, and always loved Florida, wanted to be in Florida. So as soon as I got out of the military, I came back to Fort Lauderdale. Been here since 1985, before you guys were born. And pretty much most of that time spent in banking, really, and right in Fort Lauderdale, really. A little bit in Miami, but all in South Florida. I tell people, I've really been, for the last almost 40 years in the same spot, doing the same thing, really banking. Started out with a bank called NCNB, which was the precursor of Bank of America. So that was the bank that Hugh McCall, who ended up creating Bank of America, had entered into Florida. Great place to learn about banking, great training program, and I loved it, really. But then one of my mentors left and went to work at a community bank, which is still around today, City National Bank in Miami. That bank was then owned by one family, the Abbas family. And Leonard Abbas is a prolific philanthropist, businessman, banker, and he took me under his wing, really, and taught me about community banking. And I had come out, you work in a big bank or any big organization. You worked at AT&T, you know this. And John, you've been involved in big companies. You're in a big company, you are siloed for the most part, right? You're learning one small aspect of the business unless you're in the C-suite, which is a long way away for most people who are starting out in a big company. So I just knew that one little area, which I worked in private banking when I was at Nations Bank. And I went into the community bank world, and Leonard Abbas exposed me to everything in banking, right? The balance sheet, all the concerns that you have about credit quality, all the different aspects of the entire bank. I was fascinated by it. I was like, wow, this is really cool. I never understood the whole business before until now. And then after a few years, I worked there and went on to some other banks, mostly community banks. And then in June of 2007, I was approached by a group here in Fort Lauderdale of business owners who wanted to start a bank. And I was thinking to myself, June of 2007, it was a little bit of a time where you kind of saying, well, maybe there's going to be a slowdown. Maybe there will be a recession, because things are pretty heated in the market. The housing prices were really rising quickly. I'm thinking, yeah, there probably will be a recession. I had no idea, though, that the entire economy is going to fall off the cliff. But I said, I'm going to jump in with these guys. And at 50 years old, decided to take my first entrepreneurial plunge. So my advice to anybody listening to this is don't wait till you're 50. Start much younger. Plus, not only was I 50, and you guys are, I meet with these guys for the first time. I'm like, I hope you guys have the money raised because I have 2 ex-wives and I have 4 kids and I have a job and everybody depends on me right now. So, I'll come in, I can run your bank, but I don't want I don't want to quit my job and have this not get started. I want to make sure we've got the funding. And they looked me in the eye. And I'm sure they believed, I don't think they were lying to me, they believed they had the funding secured. So I said, no problem. We had to raise $12.5 million to start the bank. So as soon as I quit my job, get started on this thing, what happens? But, banks start failing. You have large banks, Lehman Brothers, it was a cascade. Washington Mutual, largest bank failure in history. Bear Stearns, right. It was on and on. And so all of these people who had said, yeah, we'll kick in 100,000, 250,000, are not picking the phone up, right? They're just dark. And I'm going, oh my God. And I'm with this group of people and I'm like, they're like, well, I guess we're not going to be able to get this bank. I'm like, wait, whoa. I said, I quit my job. I'm like, I'm hanging out. We have to open this thing. So I went from that meeting to St. Anthony's Church and started praying because I I didn't know what else to do.
The highest power available.
It would have been a synagogue if I was Jewish, but I'm Catholic, so I went to the St. Anthony's. And so really, we're just very, very lucky that, we were able to get that $12.5 million. And it was so, so difficult. And, to anybody who has raised money, it's difficult in good times. But at that time, it was really scary, and I really thought we were going to be unable to get that bank open, but we did it. We opened January 12th of 2009. It was called Broward Bank of Commerce. And once we got open, it was a big success because at that time, as you remember, most banks were not lending money. So we were brand new. We had a clean balance sheet. We had no bad loans, and we were really helping a lot of local companies who needed financing, a lot of businesses that had been around a long time. Their banks were saying, hey, I'm sorry, we can't help you, or even worse, pay back the money we lent you. And so it was a really tough time, but for us, we were able to prosper at that time. And we ended up selling that bank about a little less than 7 years later to a bank called Centennial out of Arkansas, home bank shares, that is now, come in a big way into South Florida. But we were the first bank that they bought in South Florida. And I worked there for a little bit and I had a non-compete. But I still wanted to, I liked that after, tasting that success and starting something, I really enjoyed it. And I felt like we were really helping local companies here that needed our help at that time. So I looked around and found another opportunity at that time, which was there was a bank in Orlando called First Green Bank. And in 2016, and I knew the person who had started that bank, started the bank coincidentally right at the same year we started in 2009. So Ken LaRoe is his name. He started that bank. Talking with Ken, and then I had a conversation with a large investor, and we ended up doing a change of control with that bank in 2016. And we grew that bank to about $1 billion and then sold it to Seacoast in 2018, opened up down here, and I became the CEO of that bank. So 2018, I'm on another non-compete. I've had two nice entrepreneurial ventures that turned out successful, and I'm sitting home. I had a 2-year non-compete after that. And I'm sitting home and COVID happens. PPP program comes out. My phone is blowing up. And a lot of people who had been customers or even just acquaintances of mine that had local companies, and you guys, I'm sure remember this, were panicking because they couldn't get money through this PPP program and couldn't get a bank to call them back. And so I'm sitting there and I'm going, this sounds like 2009 all over again, you know. And I think one thing that's interesting, I don't think people realize the value of a bank relationship, or probably a lot of other relationships, until there's a crisis or until there's a problem. If everything's going fine, you don't really think about it. You take it for granted that everything's okay. But when you really need that relationship and you need somebody to pick that phone up is when you have a problem. And we all know in business, there are always problems. There are always going to be problems, and you're always going to have to deal with problems. So I went to some of the people that I know in the community. I'm a member of had been a member of the Broward Workshop. I left after we sold our business. But I went back to this group of leaders, really true business leaders in our community, and started kind of one by one asking them, do you think this is a problem? Should we start another bank? And I got a lot of yeses. Yes, we would like you to start another bank. And then, of course, I asked the all-important question, will you invest? Because it's not $12.5 million now, it's $23 million that we have to raise. And so a lot of them did contribute and sign up to invest. And we ended up launching Locality Bank. We only set out to raise $23 million. This time, the money poured in, and we ended up raising almost $40 million. We actually had to cut the raise off because we had people continuing to want to
you were
invest.
oversubscribed.
Oversubscribed, exactly. So, and I think that was a testament to the team we had put together, but I think also to the need, because what I had discovered, Jim, was that we had gone in 2016. I'm trying to figure out why was it so hard for people to get money during this PPP? It was always a crisis, yes, but one thing I discovered was that the number of community banks in 2016, there were 11 community banks headquartered in Broward County with probably about 20% of the assets of the deposits of the county. By 2020, that number had declined to 3. And the amount of bank deposits was minuscule. It declined by 96%. So that was a result of consolidation, just people coming in. And we had sold the bank. So, I benefited from that consolidation, and so did our shareholders. But what happened was the traditional source for funding for a lot of these smaller companies, I call them local businesses, because a lot of them are owned by people who live here in our community and run them, and they're family owned. Those are the people who traditionally relied on the community banks for financing. And, so identifying that as an issue, that was the problem. When we started Locality, that was a problem we set out to solve, is providing funding to local companies and doing it and of course we're in the Innovation Center, right? So not only did we want to start a community bank, but we didn't want to start one like we did in 2009 or like the one we had in 2016. We decided to embrace technology. And with Locality, we brought in one thing I did not have was a chief technology officer, and recruited Corey LeBlanc, who's become our chief technology officer, co-founder of the bank with me and Drew Sato. And that was kind of the key component that we needed to make this bank. Our technology today is as good as any bank out there. You can open an account on the phone in 5 minutes. I had experienced when we were opening our bank, opening accounts at community banks because I was trying to support them. And that was the thing I realized is how clunky, you had to go in the office and sit there for half an hour to open an account. I'm like, we can't compete that way anymore. So So we embrace technology. We call the bank really a digital-first community bank because we still are there. If you want to come in, we're right across from Tap 42 on Andrews Ave. We have a physical
Get a
office.
beer, open up an account. I love the model.
Exactly.
I did that, but we didn't have beer.
Well,
Well, I didn't open the account, but we had lunch.
Open the account, you get a bear.
Okay.
Okay, that's how that works, John. So anyway, that's pretty long, but that's the story kind of in a nutshell.
So let's take a slight dive then into what community bank means, because there's a lot of people that don't understand what that means, and they're so used to dealing with the big brands, if you will, and the pros and cons, of course. So what is community banking? And I hear a lot of feedback in the community about you and your team, your brand, that you're doing something different that others aren't doing. And I've never heard anything bad. I've only heard great things. But if you could, we have a really diverse range of listeners. But what is community banking? What is the Locality bank model? Where do you see yourself in this community? And if you even want to advance a little bit more on the technology piece of it, that'd be great too.
Sure. Well, I wish Corey was here to do that, but I'll tell you, so that's community banking is kind of a hard to define term because there are different interpretations of that. But generally speaking, it's a bank, I would say, under $10 billion in assets. So what does that mean? So a smaller bank, and it generally it's located in a certain area. It's called a community bank because it serves that local community, and the people that are involved in it generally live there. They understand the community. So you're dealing with, as I will say sometimes to people when I have a vendor calling me, and they'll say we're the largest in the world. And I'll say, well, I don't want to really deal with the largest in the world. I'd rather deal with I'd rather deal CEO to CEO, owner to, CEO. That relationship, I think, is really meaningful. And I think it's valuable for a lot of people. And they like being able to talk to somebody who's a decision maker. I've had, and I know, and nothing against large banks. We need large banks. I just don't think, and most of them, will readily admit. I mean, I've heard Jamie Dimon speak about this issue where he said, "Hey, we need the community banks to grow those small businesses up to big businesses, so we can bank them." But the larger banks, their models are really not ideal for serving those local companies. So, and with our technology, we've used we're cloud based, which I think we're one of the only. I don't know if I haven't done a survey, but I don't think, there's probably a handful of cloud-based banks in the United States. So we have our data in the cloud. We have a company called Nimbus that we use for our core banking system. Nimbus is they're basically a very forward-thinking technology company that has, I think there's probably 25 or maybe 30 banks in the country that use Nimbus. And we decided instead of going with a large, and there's some very large bank technology companies that a lot of banks end up going with, we chose to be innovative. And as the innovation center, right? That's what you guys are all about, being innovative. It's not easy.
Yep.
It's always the harder way to go. And so we opened up, and for a banker, you start talking about, well, we don't know if this is going to work or that's going to work when you start out, and we got to test it, and it takes 3 months until we can even open a bank account because we have to make sure it's going to work and we have to test it. That was hard for us, and thank God we had Corey because he kept me calm and cool. He said, "We'll get there. It's going to take a little bit longer though," and it has proven out. I mean, our technology's done nothing but get better and better and better. And we keep iterating, and the platform that we have allows us to do that with Nimbus. It's open API, so we can very easily add new technology, and we can meet with fintechs, and we can look at what they're doing and embrace kind of these new technologies, whereas a lot of our competition can't do that, right? I remember when I had another bank and I wanted to, I'm like, hey, I want to be able to open accounts in 5 minutes on the phone. They're like, well, get in line, and that's going to cost you $1 million. And, in 3 years, we'll get to your request, And that was kind of the relationship that most banks, and I think a lot do today, have with their technology vendors because they're dependent upon them. It's a very one-sided relationship. With Nimbus, we have a real partnership. So I think that gives us an advantage.
Yeah, and you were mentioning about and the value add of community banks, and my mother and some parts of my family come from the banking industry. And
Is she watching today again, by the way?
Sorry,
Is she watching
Oh,
today?
absolutely, every day.
So she may notice I have a new piece of attire on today, not my typical branded uniform.
She's going to check
Right?
that box,
Okay,
absolutely.
good.
That John wore another
Finally,
shirt.
yes.
But she talks about the days where the banking relationship with the customer was paramount.
Yeah.
That it was the importance of knowing John and knowing Keith, knowing their family, and that sort of they're from the neighborhood and so forth. And it seemed to have, dissipated, as you mentioned, about these larger banks and so forth, and eating up a lot of the marketplace. And so it's interesting that you found a real niche, and to continue to build on that, the idea of looking where is this niche in the marketplace today, and how can Locality Bank be a player in the space that has that community feel, the relationship based, but also then become digitized. And I guess if you were to sort of sum up that value proposition, Keith, of what is Locality Bank, it seems like that sort of that combination, that duality of community feel, relationship, plus technology, that seems to be the value prop. Or is there something else there?
No, you hit it on the head perfectly, Jim. When we started, that was really our model, was to say, let's take because if you look at PPP, who were the heroes of that? It was the Fintech companies who could process these things like crazy because they had great technology. And it was the community banks because they had the relationships and they worked night and day. But let's take both of those and put them together, right? Let's empower that community bank with some great technology, and you've got really the best of both worlds. And so our goal is eventually to be able to take Locality Bank and make it a local bank in other markets as well, to take that same kind of value proposition that we bring to the people. And you could say, this is a proof of concept that we're doing in Fort Lauderdale, right? So it's working. Let's take it to, there are other markets where they don't have community banks either, where the same thing has happened with consolidation. We used to have 30,000 banks in the United States, 25 years ago. There are now under 4,500 banks. So there's been tremendous consolidation. And, of course, you have these huge trillion-dollar banks at the top that hold most of the assets of the banking industry. Then you've got some mid-tier banks, and then at the other end you have the community banks. But that is where the consolidation is coming, right? Those are the ones that are disappearing. You may see some more consolidation now going forward because of some of the things that are going on in the banking industry. And I think you'll probably see some more community banks merging. You may see some of these other banks that are in between $100 billion and $1 trillion. They kind of have to get bigger, because this $100 billion area is like a no man's land right now for a lot of banks.
So what I like about your model is you're incorporating three themes: innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship, and a whole lot more. But those are the three themes that the Levan Center of Innovation was founded on, because innovation leads to the creation of new technologies that leads to these entrepreneurial journeys of which you are on. And you go back to 2007, 8, 9, when the world was changing, and then we had the COVID situation, the world was changing. Survive, adapt, recover, rethink is sort of the motto that I've been living by. If you think about South Florida as a region and all the great things that have been happening in the last, say, 5 years around the themes of entrepreneurship and technology, the investment dollars that, at least by perception, are coming into the South Florida area, and there's a real ecosystem that's beginning to grow. How does Locality Bank fit into that, and what do you see the future to look like here in South Florida? I know globally we're entering an interesting era. It may be good, it may be bad, but South Florida is still on fire. It's still attracting entrepreneurs and businesses. And what's your role in that ecosystem, and where do you think we'll be, say, 5 years from now?
So our mission statement is to empower local companies to maximize their potential. So what does that mean? So we want to work with and help companies that are based here in this market. And so startups, they're very difficult to finance at a bank, right? We have we've enhanced really our SBA programs, because those do allow us to take a little bit more risk. So anybody who's not familiar with the SBA loans, the government guarantees 75% of that loan. So we're only taking 25% of the risk. So if somebody is a little bit of a stretch on the credit side for a bank, because people have to understand, our credit criteria have to be pretty strict. We cannot, sustain really difficult credits and still stay in business, right? We've got to make smart moves. We can only miss.
You're talking about specifically the entrepreneur's FICO score specifically, or is it the credit of the business itself and their financials, or is it a combination?
So it's a combination.
Yeah.
So what do we really look at when we're making a loan? So we do look at a few different things, right? So yeah, the FICO score, the individual, do they have they saved some money? Are they financially responsible? Do they pay their bills? And that's a FICO score. And how much liquidity have they saved up? How much are they investing in the bank and the business? And then also you have the experience, right, which is so important. Have they worked in that industry? Do they understand that industry? Do they have the knowledge to be able to be successful in that business? And we all know how competitive all businesses are, right? So, and then you're going to look at, if they've started, obviously, you're going to look at the cash flow, because that, as a banker, that's what's going to repay you, right? And you would like to see, ideally, if you're going to make a loan to somebody, you'd like to see a history of cash flow for 2 or 3 years, where that will be so important. And then you go back to really the character of the individual. And a FICO score does indicate somewhat character, but it's also, is this someone who is involved in the community? Are they taking care of their employees? Are they just a good person? And so that's part of the subjective judgment that comes in when you're looking at somebody and sitting down and saying, am I going to lend this person money?
It sounds like we're both good candidates.
How much you guys need?
The personality piece we'll work on.
That's exactly right. Well, I love the business model, Keith, and it sounds like you talked about potential expansion for Locality Bank, and then what does that look like for you when you're looking at potential areas? Obviously, you're in Fort Lauderdale now, not incubating the business, but this is where you set up your initial headquarters. When you're looking to potentially expand, you and the founders to partners, you're looking at areas for demographics, for additional propensity to open up accounts maybe. What's some of the criteria in the communities that you're kind of scouting out as to for future expansion?
So I would say, as we look, there's probably not a better state than the state of Florida because I've talked to different people about this. And, just to be clear, for the first 3 years as a bank, and we're 2 1/4 years old, for the first 3 years, you're under a strict business plan. So we're Dade, Broward, Palm Beach County only. SBA lending throughout the state right now, but for our loans that we keep on the books and in the bank, it's just Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. But as we expand and we get into next year, we leave this kind of de novo bank status, and we're able to grow outside of these 3 markets, I think it becomes down to relationships. And we look to find somebody like the team that we had here, because really the relationships are what drive the business still. Technology is as a tool. I think you guys embrace technology just like we do, but it's a tool to enhance relationships. But people still are people. We're sitting here talking. People love to interact still, and we saw that after COVID, right? Everybody traveled for the next year straight because they were so tired of not being able to travel. So that's what we really look for is a good group of bankers or a good banker who could actually kind of facilitate that growth in that market. And then you look for a good market like Fort Lauderdale. We have tremendous economic growth. This is an economic engine, this area, and there's a lot of places in Florida that are similar.
So we have a surprise for Keith. What he thinks he's actually talking to Jim and John. What he doesn't know is that we're both products of our volumetric capture studio, our 3D digital twin, and it's actually AI that's actually talking, and we're not even here. We have the ability to do that, by the way.
That's how innovative it is.
That's
great.
right here. Okay, I'm going to throw you the Rubik's Cube. So I'm trying to think of a question to try and stump you, and this one I've never asked anyone before. So if you could meet anybody, your hero, dead or alive, anywhere in history, who would it be, why, and what would that conversation look like?
So immediately came to mind would be Muhammad Ali.
Ah.
And because when I was growing up as a boy, I was like so enamored of Muhammad Ali. I was just like, I can remember, I'm that old that I can remember listening to the fight when he won the heavyweight championship.
Was that Sonny Liston? I
Against
believe?
Sonny
Yeah.
Liston, yeah. And it was like the world stopped. I mean, it was such an unbelievable occurrence. And then his career, he continued to go on and have these like epic sports, just incredible achievement in the area of sports. But what he transcended was, his ability to take that success in one area and transplant it and become just, a world figure in terms of a lot of the things that he stood for. And I'm a military veteran, right? He was against the war, but I still admire him for taking that stand at that time. And I think he was a person of conviction. I think he did a great deal to enhance civil rights in our country. And just, the saddest, I did meet him once. I was at a Miami Heat game. And this is when Shaquille O'Neal was playing for the Orlando Magic. And I was at a Heat game at the old Heat Stadium, if people remember that. And all of a sudden I see Shaquille O'Neal walking over towards me. I'm like, why is Shaq coming up to me?
Can't miss him.
He reaches over me and behind me is Muhammad Ali.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh my.
Wow.
So I didn't get to shake Shaq's hand because he took off, but I was like, it was incredible. But, at that point it was sad to see Muhammad Ali because he had deteriorated so much physically, but just, so that was a easy one for me.
I didn't stump
Personal
him.
hero.
Dang. You're only the second person
That's a
not to
great-
be stumped. But
that was a great answer,
It
though,
is.
and certainly the greatest, right? I'd be remiss if I don't ask you, because I know that you travel to D.C., absolutely involved in the banking association. You talk to a number of colleagues. These things are hard to predict, and there's a lot of Powell has held off on increasing or lowering the rates. Yellen said that inflation was transitory. It's not transitory. It's just peaked up a little bit more. How do you assess the market today for finance and for banking? What are you and your colleagues thinking about, and what worries you?
So the rates are impossible to predict, right? If there's one thing, we started the bank in January of 2022, and subsequent to that time, rates have gone up 5.5%, which is unheard of in just about that quickly, unheard of in banking, right? And so for us to start a bank and then have that occur, so we started out, we did not try to predict rates, and I think you have to be aware that that's impossible, that you may try to predict them but what we try to do is be ambivalent about rates and say, okay, we can't know that. So how can we put together a plan that's going to work if rates go up or rates go down? And we do an analysis, and really all banks do, on a regular basis, although some weren't too good at it. And those are the banks that failed, like SVB in California. It's a shock to me that their board committee, and I mean, this is well known now, and even the regulators, that was apparent because all banks have to shock their balance sheets by 4%. Nobody was ever shocking them by 5.5%, though. So that was unheard of. So we try to run our business in a way that we are being conservative in the way we run it, that we're acknowledging that no matter what we think rates are going to do, we really can't know that. We can't know what the economy is going to do. We can talk to people, we can try to formulate opinions, but I think most of the people, how many people said we were going to have a recession in 2023, and we end up with 4% GDP in some quarters? So it's a fool's game, I think, to try to predict things. So I prefer to try to say, let's just acknowledge that we don't know, and we can have conversations about things. Do I think rates will come down? Yeah, I think they will. Will it be 2 cuts or 3 or some people are saying none at all. So all of those are possibilities, right? But I do believe, from conversations that I've had, and we do have an opportunity with the Florida Bankers Association. I'm really involved in that organization. We do have the opportunity to meet with Michelle Bowman, who is a voting member of the FOMC. So we've had 2 dinners with her where she talks about this. So we do have access to really high-level government people who are involved in this. And still, it's hard to tell. But I think that we know what they're trying to do. They're trying to really make sure that we don't have inflation, and I don't think they can say that yet. Although I know from what Powell's saying now, he's concerned about labor. But labor report today was very strong.
Yeah, it was a strong labor report. Yeah.
So
how do Keith, with the couple of minutes we have left,
Yes.
how do potential customers get a hold of you, the bank? Clients, entrepreneurs that are watching today, may be interested in coming to you for potential funding. How do they reach you and Locality Bank?
Yeah, so it's real easy. Keith at localitybank.com is probably the best way to get hold of me. Our website, localitybank.com, you can go on there. You can apply for loans online through that, or you can reach out to request any information. And the other thing I would say to a lot of businesses too is, because business will come to us and they'll want to borrow money, and I'll say, well, where did you go? Where are your deposits? Where are you keeping your money? And did you go to that bank? And they're like, yeah, we went to that bank. And I'm like, well, you should establish your bank account at a bank that is open to, have that conversation. If you're going to put your money, that's a lot harder for us to get people to put money in our bank than it is to loan it out, right? That is a real sign of support, and we need that from the local banks in our community. We need them to support what we're doing. And the other thing that we do is the money that we get in from the local community goes back out right here. We're lending it to local companies. So I would say that's a key thing, is make sure when you open your bank account, and not necessarily if it's with us, but with whatever bank, have that conversation. Are you guys open to lending money to local companies, to small, medium-sized businesses? Do you have SBA loans? Have that conversation going in, because anybody can take your money, and anybody will.
The hands are always open, aren't they?
Exactly. But yes, for us, that's very important. And that's the challenging part, is to be able to fund the loans with deposits. So,
Well, go ahead,
I was
John.
going to say, I know
Yeah.
we're getting ready to close, but number one, thank you for your service. And number two, just really, really quickly, like 30 seconds or less, you've got your own podcast. You want
Yes.
to give Making Bank a plug?
Oh, well, thank you guys. And yes, as we do have a podcast, which is called Banking Bank. We have entrepreneurs on there. So if anybody listening has started a business, and we've had all sides, we've had like somebody trying to get to 500,000 in sales, and we've had people on there that have started billion-dollar companies. So there's no size criteria. It's all about what can you share about how you started your business, and like my story about, and I know I'm going to have you on. I think you got a good story. I haven't heard yours yet.
Let's get on.
We'll sign you up. So, but yeah, that's available on Spotify and Apple, all the podcast areas. So.
That's terrific. So when you like, share, and subscribe to Making Bank, like, share, and subscribe to Sunshine Startups Live.
Yeah.
I love it.
Sounds like a merger acquisition happening.
Exactly. I love it. And Keith, thanks so much. You're a true man of the people. You're very giving of your time and support of the community. You're very much involved and in touch. I know you're on the board here at the Innovation Center. We share a board with Workforce Development for Career Source Broward. And I know you're very involved with waving the banner about what's happening specifically in South Florida. So thank you so much for all you do in the community, for sure.
Hey, thank you very much for having me on today. I appreciate it.
Keith
thank you.
Costello, CEO, President of Locality Bank in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Thanks again, Keith, for being on.
Thank you.
Remember to subscribe, like, and share the Sunshine Startups Live podcast, and follow us on social media. If you're interested in sponsoring or appearing on the show, please email us at booking@sunshinestartups.live.